You have two different professions. You're a lawyer, you specialize in medical law, but you're also someone who does business in the, who is in IT, in the IT business, right?
Yeah, in high technology.
High technology. As we have learned yesterday, a lot of people in Israel are, or that is the appearance that the mainstream media give, are not critical, but rather obedient as far as the vaccines are concerned.
Yeah. I'm not sure there is a media anymore, mainstream media. I think the real media is what we are doing here. It's the open media.
Let me ask you just one question. Do you have the feeling, this is what some of the people who we spoke to today said, Renate Holzeisen, for example, do you have the feeling that more and more people are turning away from the mainstream media when they're looking for real information and trying to get this real information from other sources?
Yes, I believe so. But then again, I'm saying people that have been instilled with fear, people that are following the normal trend of just getting the information from the newspaper, and if it's in the newspaper, so obviously it's true, then it's harder for people to wake up. But as we talked yesterday, and we reminded this famous saying that refers to Abraham Lincoln, which probably is not, he was not the one to say it, but it doesn't really matter who is the one to have the copyright. Yeah. But you can fool all the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. And now what we see is that there is something going on for a long time. So as long as time is passing, more people and more people are waking up. We'll go back to the question about the media, the mainstream or so-called media. This is not a media, this is a propaganda. And normally you can see that these are big corporations in everywhere, in economics, in health, in communication, and they are being controlled by a lot of money. And instead of being what we are calling the fourth pillar of democracy, critical channels for information that ask the right questions, bring different opinions to the table, we see what I call a propaganda, because we see, and definitely in Israel, because I can speak about Israel, there is an agenda, and that agenda is being pushed over the population, and unfortunately with a lot of success in the state of Israel. And it's kind of, I would say, symbolic that I'm here in Germany getting a help of people like you guys that are saying giving different information and having a different conversation, when in Israel, which is supposed to be, I think, the leader because of our history of freedom of speech and critical thinking, it became, I feel, and I represent many people in Israel right now that feels that the country, in terms of consciousness, is being hijacked, and that people are being fooled and maneuvered to believe that they are leading the world. People are so happy with the vaccination, they're almost there, getting out of this corona thing. It's just around the corner, and this is the lie that they are perpetuating to them, and many people are buying it. And it's very sad.
The ironic thing is that you're here in Germany, and there's something I have to tell you, because my father, who was 13 when the war ended, so he was not a soldier in the army because he was too young, but he remembered everything. He remembered when he was born and raised in Bremerhaven, which is a port city. And he saw during the war planes crashing in the city he didn't know whether it was British or American or German planes that crashed there, but he saw the dead people. One of the planes crashed in front of their house, and he told me this story once, and but it was obvious that it had left a deep impression on him. And the pilot was still in his pilot's seat, but he was decapitated. That was shocking for someone who's 11 or 12 years old. And he wanted to find out what had really happened. And he watched all the old news shows when they finally reappeared on television. He read all the books, and he got me and my brother and sister interested in this as well. So I think in the end, he was very well aware of what had happened. Was he alive now? If he died in 2006, he had an accident scuba diving in Australia. It was a good death, but were he alive now, well, he'd be rolling in his grave if he could see what was going on here. Now, the irony is that you're an Israeli. This country is the country that is responsible for 6 million people's deaths. And the irony is that you're here now, and we're talking about how we are worried, us here are worried, that something very similar to what happened back then is happening again in your country with your people, with a lot of people being completely unaware of the dangers of these vaccinations.
Totally. So why would you rush and vaccinate majority of people? They're talking about vaccinate now children in Israel, pregnant women in Israel. And you know what they're basing that? And I've read some answers from professionals, like officials, official health experts from the regime. They're saying, we don't have data that shows that this is dangerous for them. So obviously it should be okay. This is the opposite of the principle of how the medicine standards are worked, at least worked until lately. We know after World War II, and again, it's symbolic, we're talking about it here in the table in Berlin, we had the Nuremberg trials. The Nuremberg trials were trials about crimes against humanity. That's the worst that you can be tried for, a person could be tried for. And then there was a realization, and then that we need to have different rules, set of rules that we didn't have before. And I'm emphasizing this because I have a point at the end. So our fathers and grandfathers, they made a change in the doctrine, and they said now we have a Nuremberg Code, which is dealing about anything of medical treatment, and in particular about experiments. Then we had a progression with that, which calls the Helsinki Declaration. Again, making those things established, and then all different countries started to adopt these principles and got them into their own legal system. So we, for instance, in Israel, we have a law for the protection of a patient. Or the rights of the patients. And one of the principles in there is the informed consent. So you have to give a consent. And I always explain to people, consent means that you cannot consent if you don't want to. Otherwise, there is no meaning for consent. It's either I want or I don't want. And it has to be informed. And there are details what it has to be informed. But there's another principle, the principle of privacy. There can never be a real consent if it's not private. That's why we have private elections. It's confidential, because if I'm going to vote and people knows what I'm doing, then it will affect the way, because I can be apprised or I can be denied by my friends. But if nobody knows, then it's private. I can make an independent decision. So those principles are under a very heavy attack. And in Israel, they're making this trial, this experiment on the population. Nobody gets an informed consent. Nobody gets the extra information that you have to give in a trial, in an experiment. You have to explain also the nature of this experimental procedure, which is, by the way, what the FDA approved under an experimental phase, not just regular approval. And this affects people's decision. But I want to end with that I'm getting all day long, even when I was here, and I'm getting people approaching me, it becomes unfortunately, the officials and the regimes are trying to establish a new norm, not by law, by conduct.
Yes.
So now, for instance, in the army, because the people are young, they're over 18, they have a sovereignty to make their own decisions, so the parents cannot interfere, and that's okay. But they have a lot of peer pressure, definitely in that group of age.
Same here in Germany. And with the army and other...
And now it's coming to school. Next week they don't want to start into school. Now again, the people that can be hurt, according to the information that we have, are the elderly.
Yeah.
Why would we have to vaccinate everybody else? And also create a norm that people can ask you, are you vaccinated? Where are you going to be vaccinated? People got letters that they cannot go back to work if they are not showing vaccination. Now, when they come to me and ask me for help, and they said, maybe I should ask them that they will take responsibility, and I'm saying, no. You have to tell them, this is none of your business, what I do and what I don't do. And this is a violation or attempt for violation of my privacy, which has a criminal side as well. You can go to the police and follow or complain. But it's not about that. It's just, we have to understand where this shift is taking society. They want to take us back before the war. They want to take us back before the time that we have developed all these new and all these concepts of human rights and privacy, which built a glue for a democratic society. So it's not going to be a democratic society anymore.
They want to get rid of it.
If we're going to get rid of it, and the top of, I would say, on the edge of where it can go, and they already talk about it seriously in Israel, is what they call the green passport, which happily enough, it seems to be rejected already by the European countries. But in Israel, people believe that they could not even go and travel the world without it, which is probably not going to happen. And also it will have classes within the population. And this is in the state of Israel. So I want to mention also one thing on a personal level. My grandfathers from both sides were Holocaust survivors. And from my father's side, my grandfather, which I knew very well and I loved him deeply, he was an officer in the Red Army, and he was injured 3 times during the war, and 3 times came back, because back then it was a different story how it works. And I grew up on those stories. And I grew up on the basis that we are now having our own country, that we're not being ruled by people outside, but unfortunately there is no immunity. If we're already talking about vaccine, there is no immunity from people to be hijacked by bad guys. It might happen to one nation or another. There is a history, but no one is immune. And this year, unfortunately, I'm saying it it makes me very sad that my country represents now how a society can be hijacked by bad guys.
Well, we're going to work on this.
Yes.